If you stepped into a time machine, travelled back exactly 10 years to 2014, and committed your financial life to Dave Ramsey's 7 baby steps, where would you be today? You would undoubtedly be debt-free. You would likely own your home outright. You would sleep very well at night. But if we run the actual, undeniable mathematics of the last decade, you would also be hundreds of thousands of dollars poorer than the person who followed optimized modern financial theory. Dave Ramsey is the undisputed heavyweight champion of behavioral finance. His radio show and financial peace curriculum have pulled millions of people back from the brink of bankruptcy. For the chronic overspender, Ramsey is the financial equivalent of Alcoholics Anonymous, a rigid, zero-tolerance program designed to break destructive addictions. But what happens when you graduate from financial rehab? What happens when you apply crisis management advice to long-term wealth building in one of the most unprecedented economic decades in modern history? From 2014 to 2024, the financial markets experienced historically low mortgage rates, a raging bull market, and a global pandemic. The mathematical landscape completely shifted beneath our feet. I wanted to know the truth, so I ran his core doctrines through the actual data of the last 10 years. As a financial analyst, I've learned that being right and being rich aren't always the same thing. In this breakdown, I've adopted a contrarian but fair approach. I'm separating Ramsey's psychological mastery from his mathematical advice to see what actually happened to the people who took his word as gospel. We're going to look at the rules that undeniably work, the advice that aged terribly, and the one massive calculation error in his system that cost his followers a literal fortune. Before we dive into the spreadsheets, if you find value in looking at the hard numbers behind the financial myths we're told, the best ROI on your time today is to hit that subscribe button. It ensures you don't miss our deep dive audits into the systems that control your wealth. Now, before we tear into the mathematics, we must give credit where it is mathematically and psychologically due. Ramsey's approach to eliminating consumer debt is fundamentally sound for the average human being, primarily because humans are not spreadsheets. If we were, we wouldn't have debt in the first place. This brings us to baby step 2, the debt snowball. Ramsey tells his followers to list their debts from smallest balance to largest, ignoring interest rates. You pay minimums on everything, attack the smallest debt with a vengeance, and when it's gone, you roll that payment into the next smallest debt. Mathematically, the debt snowball is inefficient. The debt avalanche method, which is paying off debts from the highest interest rate to the lowest, will mathematically save you more money in interest every single time. It's a fact. But over the last 10 years, behavioral economics has actually proven Ramsey right. A landmark study published in the Harvard Business Review found that consumers who tackled small balances first were significantly more likely to eliminate their entire debt. The human brain requires dopamine. When a debtor has $40,000 in credit card debt across 5 cards, telling them to attack a $15,000 balance at 24% interest before a $500 medical bill at 0% interest makes mathematical sense, but psychological nonsense. After 6 months of paying the $15,000 card and seeing the balance barely move, fatigue sets in. The debtor gives up. By clearing the $500 bill in a month, the debtor gets a psychological win. This momentum carries them forward. Over the last 10 years, Ramsey's followers who utilized the debt snowball succeeded at a massive rate because they stayed in the game. If you are drowning in consumer debt, mathematical optimization is a secondary concern to behavioral modification. Ramsey's rigid rules on budgeting and cutting up credit cards are the perfect antidote to the American consumer debt crisis. While the debt snowball is a psychological win, Ramsey's baby step 1 has become a mathematical nightmare. He tells his followers to save a starter emergency fund of exactly $1,000. He has preached this exact number since 2003. He didn't change it in 2014, and he hasn't changed it today. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, $1,000 in 2003 had the same buying power as about $1,700 today. Even if we strictly look at our 10-year window from 2014 to 2024, the cumulative rate of inflation is roughly 32%. In 2014, $1,000 might have covered a blown tire or a minor medical deductible. In 2024, an average emergency room visit or a major car repair routinely exceeds that amount. Because Ramsey followers are instructed to stop all investing and pause all excess savings while they are in baby step 2, which takes the average person 18 to 24 months, they are living on a razor's edge with a $1,000 safety net. Over the last decade, as inflation peaked, that $1,000 became painfully inadequate. When a follower faces a $1,500 emergency with only $1,000 in the bank, they are often forced to borrow from family, or, worse, take out predatory loans because they've already closed their credit cards. Wait, it gets worse. By refusing to index that emergency fund to inflation, Ramsey is essentially asking his followers to take on more risk, not less. The psychological urgency of having a small fund is smart, but the failure to adjust for the reality of 2024 prices has left millions dangerously exposed. A modernized starter emergency fund should be at least 1 month of living expenses, but Ramsey refuses to budge. This dogmatic adherence to a number from 20 years ago is our first sign that his system is more about discipline than it is about data. But if you think a small emergency fund is risky, wait until you see what happens when you decide to live without a credit score. Ramsey calls the FICO score an I love debt score. He advises followers to let their credit scores drop to indeterminable, or 0. He suggests finding a mortgage lender that does manual underwriting, which is a process where a human reviews your utility bills and rent history to grant a mortgage. It sounds noble, but let's look at the reality of being an American with no credit score over the last 10 years. In the wildly competitive housing markets of 2020 through 2022, where sellers were receiving dozens of cash offers, a buyer relying on a sluggish manual underwriting process was routinely pushed to the bottom of the pile. Living without a FICO score doesn't just make it harder to buy a house, it makes it more expensive to live. Corporate landlords now dominate the rental market, and they use automated algorithms to screen applicants. If you have no credit score, the software often automatically rejects you. Then there's the hidden insurance tax. In almost every state, auto and homeowners insurance companies use credit-based insurance scores to determine your premiums. According to Consumer Reports, a driver with a clean record but no credit score will often pay significantly more for insurance than a driver with a DUI but an 800 FICO score. By dogmatically refusing to use a credit card, like a debit card, where you pay it off in full every month to avoid all interest, Ramsey followers essentially paid a convenience tax to society for a decade. They paid higher insurance premiums, struggled to secure housing, and missed out on thousands of dollars in credit card sign-up bonuses and cashback rewards that could have been funneled into their debt. Ramsey argues that you'll spend more if you use plastic, but for the disciplined optimizer, the math just doesn't support a zero-credit lifestyle in a digital economy. If you want to actually track these numbers and see where your money is leaking, you need a system that doesn't rely on 20-year-old catchphrases. That is why I built the ultimate personal finance dashboard. Before we get into the one calculation error that cost followers hundreds of thousands of dollars, we need to talk about execution. Most people fail because they don't have a map. I've developed a suite of digital templates, including the ultimate personal finance dashboard and the debt payoff tracker, which you can find at the link in the description. These aren't just spreadsheets. They are the exact mathematical systems I use to track my net worth, analyze my investment fees, and optimize my budget against inflation. While Ramsey's tools are great for beginners, these templates are designed for those of you who want to graduate from financial rehab and actually start building wealth with surgical precision. If you're ready to stop guessing and start calculating, check out the link below. It's the best way to support this channel and your own bottom line at the same time. Now, let's talk about the mortgage mistake. This is where the math begins to truly diverge from the Ramsey dogma, and where the opportunity cost of the last decade becomes staggering. Baby step 6 instructs followers to pay off their home mortgage as fast as possible. Once you are out of debt and putting 15% into retirement, every extra dollar should go to the principal of your home. Let's travel back to 2014. The average 30-year fixed mortgage rate hovered around 4%. By 2021, millions of Americans refinanced their homes at historic lows of 2.5% to 3.5%. Ramsey advised his followers to aggressively throw extra cash at these 3% mortgages. Let's look at a case study of a Ramsey follower versus a mathematically optimized investor over the last 10 years. Both individuals have a $300,000 mortgage at 3.5%. Both have an extra $1,000 a month in disposable income. The Ramsey follower sends that extra $1,000 to the mortgage principal. They save tens of thousands in interest and pay off their home in less than 15 years. They achieve that psychological bliss of a paid-off house. But the optimized investor understands that a 3.5% mortgage is cheap money, especially when inflation runs hot. Inflation makes fixed-rate debt cheaper over time because you pay it back with devalued dollars. Instead of paying extra on the mortgage, the optimizer invests that $1,000 a month into a simple S&P 500 index fund. Here is the result of that choice. Over the last 10 years, the S&P 500 returned an annualized average of roughly 12.5% with dividends reinvested. Investing $1,000 a month for 10 years at that return results in a portfolio worth approximately $230,000. The total amount contributed was $120,000. The pure profit from the market was $110,000. If you subtract the 3.5% interest the optimized investor paid on the mortgage by not paying it down early, they still come out ahead by a massive margin. Ramsey's intense hatred of debt blinded him to the concept of opportunity cost. By treating a 3% mortgage the same as a 24% credit card, he directed his followers to bury their liquidity in the walls of their houses. A house is a highly illiquid asset. If an emergency happens, you cannot easily eat your drywall. The optimized investor has a $230,000 liquid brokerage account. The Ramsey follower has equity that is completely trapped unless they sell their home or, ironically, take out a home equity loan, which Ramsey forbids. This is the difference between having peace and having options. If paying off a low-interest mortgage early was a missed opportunity, Ramsey's specific investing advice is a catastrophic mathematical calculation error. He tells his followers 3 things. You can expect a 12% annual return, you should invest strictly in actively managed mutual funds, and you should hire a SmartVestor Pro to pick those funds for you. Over the last decade, every single one of these pillars has been thoroughly dismantled by financial data. Ramsey passionately tells his followers that they can find funds that will easily beat the market. He calls index funds average. But let's look at the SPIVA scorecard, which tracks the performance of actively managed funds against their benchmarks. The data from the last decade is brutal. More than 90% of actively managed large-cap mutual funds underperformed the S&P 500 index over a 10-year period. Ramsey's followers are chasing the elusive 10% of funds that beat the market. But here is the catch. The funds that beat the market over one 10-year period rarely beat it over the next. It is essentially dart throwing. When you factor in the fees, the situation goes from bad to worse. Ramsey's endorsed network of advisors frequently push A-share mutual funds, which come with a front-end load. This is a sales commission charged right off the top, often as high as 5.75%. Let's calculate the damage of that fee. If a Ramsey follower invests $10,000 into one of these funds, $575 is immediately siphoned off to pay the advisor. Only $9,425 is actually invested. In addition to that front-end load, these funds carry high expense ratios, often around 1% annually. Compare this to a Vanguard or Fidelity Index fund, where there are zero front-end loads and the expense ratio is typically around 0.03%. Over a 30 to 40-year investing lifetime, the fees associated with Ramsey's mutual fund advice will devour anywhere from 25 to 33% of a follower's total potential wealth. It is a calculation error that costs the average American hundreds of thousands of dollars. Thanks to the magic of compound interest, those small percentages matter more than almost anything else. Ramsey is essentially recommending a system where his advisors get rich, while his followers settle for market-lagging returns. If you want to avoid being the person who funds an advisor's vacation while your own retirement stalls, you have to look at the math, not the charisma of the person giving the advice. And that leads us to the most dangerous piece of advice in the entire Ramsey ecosystem. Recently, Ramsey went on an explosive rant attacking the widely accepted 4% rule for retirement. He claimed that because the market returns 12% and inflation is 4%, retirees can safely withdraw 8% of their nest egg every year. He called proponents of the 4% rule morons and goobers. The financial science community recoiled in horror, and for good reason. The fatal flaw in Ramsey's math is called sequence of returns risk. Ramsey calculates his numbers using an average return. He assumes the market goes up a steady 12% every single year like a metronome. But the market is highly volatile. The S&P 500 might return 24% one year, 10% the next, and drop nearly 20% the year after, as it did in 2022. If you retire and the market immediately drops 20% in your first year, and you still withdraw 8% of your initial portfolio value, you have decimated your principal. Even when the market rebounds, you have fewer shares left to capture the growth. Morningstar's recent report on safe withdrawal rates concluded that for a balanced portfolio over a 30-year retirement, the safe rate is actually between 3.8 and 4%. Recommending an 8% withdrawal rate is mathematically reckless. We are approaching the final verdict on a decade of Ramsey. But before we wrap up, I want to invite you to take your financial education a step further. If you're the kind of person who values data over dogma, click the join button below to become one of the optimizers. Channel members get priority comment replies from me personally and custom sketch badges that show you're part of a community that prioritizes mathematical truth. It's a small way to join a group of like-minded people who are building wealth through evidence, not just enthusiasm. Now, let's look at the big picture of what happened to the people who followed this path for 10 years and why the results are so mixed. So, what actually happened to the people who followed Dave Ramsey for the last 10 years? For those who came to him drowning in debt and fighting with their spouses over money, the experience was a miraculous turnaround. They learned the discipline of delayed gratification. For these individuals, the Ramsey tax, the missed market gains and high fees, was a price they were willing to pay to avoid bankruptcy. But for those who were already financially disciplined, Ramsey's rigid system left staggering amounts of money on the table. We lived through the greatest wealth-building decade in human history. Wealth is built through the intelligent use of leverage and the acquisition of appreciating assets. The people who built generational wealth over the last decade did so by securing fixed-rate debt at sub 4%, holding on to that cheap debt as inflation skyrocketed, and funneling liquidity into low-cost index funds. Ramsey's doctrine explicitly forbade his followers from participating in these wealth-building mechanisms. His system is a blunt instrument. It is a sledgehammer designed to smash the concrete wall of chronic debt. It does that job better than anything else. But once the wall is down and it is time to build a house, you don't use a sledgehammer. You need a scalpel. You need index funds, tax optimization, and mathematical compounding. For the first 3 baby steps, Dave Ramsey is a genius. For the rest of your financial life, he can be a liability. The people who followed him for 10 years are likely debt-free and peaceful, but they are also staring at significantly smaller retirement accounts than they could have had. If you followed the Ramsey plan, you didn't fail, but you might have been playing the game on hard mode without realizing it. The goal of this channel is to help you move past the sledgehammer and start using the scalpel. I want to hear from you in the comments. Did you follow the baby steps over the last decade? Did you pay off a 3% mortgage early? Or did you pivot to the market? Let's treat the comment section as a peer review session. Post your numbers, your successes, and your regrets. I'll be down there responding to as many as I can to see what we can learn from your real-world data. If you enjoyed this deep dive, check out my other videos on the math of home ownership and the truth about index funds. Until next time, keep running the numbers. I'm Tom, and this is Tom Talks Money.